Live from the Ken and Valerie Baker studio at WHYY, this is Studio 2.
On Tuesday, July 15th, welcome to the show. I'm Cherry Gregg.
I like the multiple welcomes. I really like that. I don't know if that's a new thing.
I had to throw something in there.
I like that a lot. I'm Afi Wolfman Arendt. I also welcome you to the program. Cherry, set us up today.
Yes, a year ago, the U.S. southern border was a mess, and President Donald Trump made mass deportation a signature campaign promise. In fact, polls show it got him elected. And now Mr. Trump has made immigration a top priority. At first, the public was with him, but 6 months into his administration, and Americans are shifting, signaling disapproval for some of the administration's tactics. In fact, a new Gallup poll finds record high support for immigration, and not just among Democrats. Even Republicans are rethinking the issue. So what is behind this pivot in public sentiment, and how far is too far when it comes to immigration enforcement? We'll be talking about that today with two guests who have differing viewpoints on this issue. And our question of the day for you, our listeners, is what do you think Americans really want on immigration? The number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, put those comments in the live chat.
Yeah, what do you think Americans really want on immigration? What do you make of this public opinion whiplash? We would love to hear from you today. Again, that number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. Let's get to a trio of local news stories before we get to all of that, Cherry. And we're going to start in Pittsburgh, where today Donald Trump, the aforementioned President Trump, will be speaking at a summit on energy and artificial intelligence. This summit is being organized by freshman Senator Dave McCormick. And at this summit, reportedly, officials will announce $70 billion in AI and energy investments across Pennsylvania, including a $26 billion data center in Northeast Pennsylvania. Boy, those data centers are expensive. They've also been in the news a lot recently. Governor Josh Shapiro recently announced a big push by Amazon to build data centers here in the state, including one in Bucks County. And speaking of Shapiro, he is going to appear on a panel at this summit alongside McCormick. At least that's what the senator's office told the Inquirer. So some energy implications here and some political implications.
Yeah, it feels very bipartisan. You know, you have the Republicans and Democrats coming together on this issue. Lots of investments, as you said, in those data centers. I mean, they have to generate a lot of power, which means, you know, they have to do a lot of building, which could generate thousands of construction jobs and thousands of permanent jobs here in Pennsylvania.
But I wonder, as the rubber starts to hit the road on this, because investment sounds good until they're building the data center in your backyard, or they're expanding the power grid in your backyard. I'm very curious where this goes, because these projects are popping up all over the state and all over the country. You need a lot of power for these data centers.
You really do. And I think, you know, this also raises the question of whether Pennsylvania could be a leader when it comes to artificial intelligence and these types of centers. We'll see.
Let's head to New Jersey now, Cherry. This is an interesting one.
Yeah, a tiny little town on the Jersey Shore now has the right, according to the New Jersey Supreme Court, to secede from its current township and join another township if they are accepted by them. And this case was very fascinating to me. The town is South Seaside Park. Only has about 500 residents. It's in Ocean County, New Jersey, about 90 minutes.
That makes it a hamlet, I think.
Yeah,
500. I'm not giving you a town. I'm calling you a hamlet.
It's teeny tiny, and it's about 90 minutes outside of Philly, if you've never heard of them. And they were part of Berkeley Township, but they were separated from the township by Barnegat Bay and 7 other municipalities. So they had to drive through 7 municipalities to get to their township headquarters.
It's a very strange arrangement.
Yes.
Here's this place, South Seaside Park. It's not that close to the rest of the township it's in.
No, it's not. And for the past decade plus, South Seaside Park has been trying to de-annex itself from Berkeley Township
De-annex.
and join neighboring Seaside Park, which is right next door.
Yeah. So they're next to this other township.
And they're like, we should just join them.
We should be part of them, not this township 15 miles away.
Yeah. And so the reason why they said, look, if you're a senior citizen, if you have a kid, you got to drive 15 miles to get any type of services. But in order to succeed in New Jersey, you have to reach a very high bar. And the New Jersey Supreme Court said they did it.
All right. So now they have the chance to leave Berkeley Township.
Yeah.
The question is whether Seaside Park will accept them.
That's another hurdle they have to go through. But Seaside, I say Berkeley Township fought hard because, this little town, this little
lose the tax
hamlet,
base, yeah.
as you called it, has 11% of their taxes.
Yeah.
Right, but only 2% of the population,
which makes sense because it's seaside. So
yeah,
that's
it's
valuable
so expensive
property.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm not a lawyer, but I think if you want to join another township, you should have to put together
some kind of a presentation.
Sizzle,
I need a PowerPoint.
Sizzle reel, maybe. So I looked up South Seaside Park, and this is what they've got. This is what I'm putting on their sizzle reel, okay? Did you know that the governor of New Jersey has an official beach house?
Oh, it's nice over there. Yeah.
So it's in South Seaside Park. The governor has their own beach house, and that's a nice little commodity.
Yeah.
This is the beach,
and they're bringing like millions in property taxes. So
this is the beach where Chris Christie was photographed on the empty beach when the state budget was. Remember that photograph?
Yeah, I do remember that. But
so
yes,
that happened.
Do.
So it's a historic place. They've also got a business called Imperial Limo and Car Service. So if you want to rent a limo, they've got that. I'm putting that in the sizzle reel.
And they do have a white sand beach. It's pretty nice.
They have a white sand beach. They also have a restaurant called Bum Rogers Crab House and Tavern.
That's a draw.
Something on the menu called Clam Pissers. So I think that's a pretty appealing.
That does not sound delicious.
That sounds like a pretty appealing pitch. So you got Bum Rogers, you got Imperial Limo,
and that Christie photo.
You got the Christie photo. I think this is a compelling case. I'm letting them in.
I think they're gonna get in. I really do, especially with that tax revenue.
We here at Studio 2 are rooting for you, South Seaside. Let them in, Seaside Park.
Let them in.
One more story now.
Yep.
I love this one. This is from our own Peter Crimmins. So there's a massive book of signatures collected in the early 20th century.
And when you say massive, it's huge.
It's so big. It's crazy big. And these signatures were collected in the 20th century, and they've been sitting in a private Philadelphia collection for about a century. But now they are going to head to northern Croatia, where the man who assembled this book was born. The guy's name was Joseph Mikulek. He is born in Croatia. He spent his life walking around the globe with a 60-pound book that ultimately contained about 60,000 signatures,
a lot of signatures
that he collected. This was his life's work.
Pretty
cool life. Guy just walked around the world with a big old book and got people's signatures. He got signatures from lots of ordinary people, and he also managed to, through like self-promotion and I guess just persistence, get the autographs of people like Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Edison, 6 U.S. presidents, and many, many more.
Wow.
Late in his life, this guy, he needed some money. So he sold his big signature book to Samuel Robinson, who was the founder of what ultimately became the Acme grocery stores. And that's how the book ended up in Philly. But now his hometown has purchased the book. They're bringing it back to northern Croatia. The big book, which we never even knew was here, is leaving Philadelphia.
And by the way, that book is 8 inches thick. And this guy walked, according to Peter's reporting, what is the equivalent of 8 times around the world. He did not catch Uber. He was like literally carrying this 8-inch thick book on his
60
shoulders.
pounds, Cherry.
But the book still has some blank pages in it, which I found interesting. And they're going to add some more signatures, including our very own Philadelphia mayor.
Is that locked in?
They're trying.
They're trying.
Yeah.
It does take me back to, signatures were the big things back in the day, right? If you met a celebrity, you wanted their signature. I guess the selfie has kind of supplanted the signature at this point. Do people still really ask for signatures? Either way, This took me back to a simpler
Yeah.
time when, everyone wanted a signature.
And I think about like people not being able to read cursive. Are they even going to be able to read these signatures? You know
We're
what I
back
mean?
on the cursive thing?
I know.
I thought we were
I
over
know,
this.
but no, but I like the idea of signatures. It's like a little piece
Wow,
of the
now
person
I
for
have to
over 100
reconsider
years.
my anti-cursive stance now because I am pro-signature.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
you're
Bit of a
pro-signature,
dilemma for me.
anti-cursive.
Just a dilemma for me. Yeah, but I love the signature. Signature feels so real.
And
The
you can
selfie
touch
feels
it.
so fleeting.
Yeah,
Yes,
you can touch it and
touch
you can feel it in the book. It's just, I don't know.
I am sad I never knew the big book was here because I would have loved to see the big book.
I know you love history.
I
Just
love
looking at
history.
those,
I
yeah.
like books, kind of. I love big old books. I'm curious how
This has everything for you.
it has
Avi.
everything. And it's
A
60
big old
pounds.
book
I
with
just
a lot
want
of
to. I
history.
just want to lift a 60-pound book. I want to
Yeah.
know what that feels like.
Yeah.
Anyways, cool story. Good job by Peter. Stick with us here on Studio 2
Mm-hmm.
for our conversation the rest of the hour, all about immigration, specifically what seems to be rapidly shifting public opinion on immigration. What does it mean, and what do you think Americans really want on this issue? Give us a call, 888-477-9499.
We'll be back. Welcome back to Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt. Voters were fed up over immigration. They voted for Trump. That headline ran in the New York Times the day after Donald Trump won his second presidential election. After a decade of relentless focus on the ills of immigration, Trump seemed to convince many Americans that his hardline approach was the way to go. And poll after poll suggested it was among his strongest issues, if not his strongest issue.
So, how do we explain the polling today? Since returning to the White House 6 months ago, Trump has indeed pursued an immigration policy focused on detention and deportation. Yet, new numbers show Americans are souring on the administration's approach. According to Gallup, 62% now disapprove of Trump's approach on the issue.
So is this a blip or a warning sign for the midterms? And what explains this public opinion whiplash? We're going to talk to a couple of panelists about it. Zeke Hernandez is a professor at the Wharton School and author of The Truth About Immigration. Nice to see you, Zeke.
Good to be here.
And let's also welcome Terry Tracy, CEO of Broad and Liberty. Great to have you back on the program, Terry.
Always happy to be here. Thank you, guys.
And for you, our listeners at home and elsewhere, we want to hear from you. What do you think Americans really want to see when it comes to immigration? Our number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, put your comments in the live chat.
I'll start with you, Zeke. I guess the question, of course, before we dive into what it means is it real? Right? Is the public opinion shift on immigration indicative of actually changing opinions among immigration, or just polling variance, or maybe even just a moment in time that will recede? What do you think?
I think it's a little bit of everything, but I think where I would start is that we know pretty well from the data that Americans like immigrants. and Americans understand the value that immigrants bring to their communities economically and in other ways, and they always have. I think we have to separate the immigration system and how the system works and the perceptions of fairness of the system from immigrants themselves. And so I don't think that the polls are telling us that Americans have changed their opinions of immigrants, but they perceive that now that the border seems to be a little bit more orderly, a little bit more under control, a lot of the interior policies that the Trump administration is following have never been popular. If you ask people, and some of this has to do also with how you ask the questions. If you ask people, do you want to deport criminals? Everybody will say yes. Who doesn't want to deport criminals? But when they realize, wait, they're defining violent criminals as people who just work in farms, right? These are not criminals. This is the person who is doing something good for my community. Nobody wants that. So I don't think that has ever changed. It's just that during the election, the presidential campaign sort of keyed in on a discomfort that people had with the way the system was working that then I think got misinterpreted into something bigger than what it is.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Terry? Has something changed here?
I agree with a lot of what Zeke just said. I mean, I think that what you saw in the results of last year's election was just a complete rejection of the chaos that was at the border and sheer open border policies. But I don't think Americans, frankly, I don't even think a lot of Trump or Trump supporters are inherently anti-immigrant. I think like any other survey, when you get into the weeds, there are a number of contradictions there. One of the more interesting things is amongst Republicans. Republicans are still heavily in favor of mass deportation efforts in the poll, but also support a path to citizenship for Dreamers by a large majority.
Right. So the Gallup poll specifically.
Yeah, the Gallup poll specifically. So there's some contradictions in there that say that I think we're still trying to sort out where the American electorate is on a lot of these policies. It's too soon to say. But what I do think, and maybe we'll have time to talk more about this as the show goes on, is this polling presents a massive opportunity, I think, for the Trump administration to achieve what a number of presidents have tried to achieve, probably going back to Bill Clinton, which is some kind of substantial bipartisan immigration reform.
And that sort of leads to my next question, because the issue of immigration, I used to cover this locally for years. It kept coming up. Yeah. I mean, this has been bubbling to the surface for decades. And in recent years, it's sort of bubbled to the surface. I mean, we've been asking people what they really want. And now, do you think people just don't like to see enforcement close up? Because President Donald Trump, when he was on the campaign trail, he kept saying the largest mass deportation effort in American history. But that may not have registered to most people what that actually would look like. Zeke, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think people really understood the implications of what he was promised. He is doing what he promised to do.
Absolutely.
He is doing what he said he would do, right? There shouldn't be a surprise when you pay attention to what he said and what he's doing now. The issue is that on the ground, you start to realize, wait, these are not criminals. These are people who are picking the food I eat, right? These are people who are doing jobs that are valuable. These are people that are paying local taxes, that are populating my neighborhood and keeping property values up, that are, doing things that we all think that they should do. And now people are starting to realize, wait, that's maybe not really what I understood. And you're seeing story after story of people who otherwise voted for Trump saying, wait, this is not what I signed up for. I've spent the last year sort of crisscrossing the country talking to people from all walks of life, and many of them being Trump voters who are saying this is not really what we wanted. And that's interesting, right? That's a contradiction, because it's not a mystery that they're doing this. This is actually what the administration said they would do.
Brian comments, agreeing much with what you said, Zeke. The whiplash is more an indication that Americans are ignorant of policy and ignorant of the degree to which immigrants, documented and undocumented, are woven into the fabric of our communities and economy. This was entirely predictable and telegraphed by Trump. Is that true, Terry Tracy? Do people just not understand what mass deportation would mean or would look like in practice? Do you think even Republicans are surprised by what it looks like, it feels like in practice?
I think that ignorance is not the issue. I think that complexity is the issue, and I think nuance is the issue. And, I think Trump has shown some flexibility on this question of deportation so far in the early months here. For instance, at first there was going to be mass deportation efforts amongst farm workers and hotel workers. And the Department of Agriculture stepped in and ultimately said that there's going to be some exemptions there, that we're going to focus on folks where there's criminal activity first, and we are going to de-emphasize those two industries. How that's played out in practice, it's too soon to say. That announcement was just made a couple of weeks ago. But I think that Trump has a knack for sort of talking about things in thematically or in broad strokes, and on the campaign trail did not really get to a practical level of detail around a lot of how a lot of these things are going to be carried out. And it's fair to say that as they hit close to home and local stories come out, that people will feel that some people who voted for Trump and do not want open border chaos would like to see the system function in an equitable and humane way as well, even if deportation is the ultimate outcome.
And I also wonder this because, when you think about mass deportation and you think about the border was so far away from a lot of Americans, of course, until folks start dropping, busloads of people in major cities. But I mean, it just seems so far away. But when you see the raids in your neighborhood and you talk about the interior enforcement, do you feel like there's something about bringing the enforcement closer to home that sort of helped with this shift at all? Zeke, Terry?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you see, a military style operation in a park, right? Like we saw the images in LA last week. Nobody's there. It's just a show of force. Or there were videos from a neighborhood in Utah, just a residential street with like a line of.
But what's strange to me is that I think the Trump administration is intending for people to see those images. They're not hiding that. And so clearly there was a calculation that politically this was what people wanted to see. Were they just wrong, Zeke?
I don't know. I'm not a politician. I'm also not a Republican or Democrat. I'm an independent. But my reading of the tea leaves here is that there are kind of two factions in the administration. One that's sort of embodied in Stephen Miller in a very, I think we can all agree, fairly extremist view, where expulsion is the goal inherently in and of itself, regardless of the consequences. And then there's perhaps a more moderate coalition that is advocating for things like, hey, let's not deport farm workers. And I think what you see in the president's social media posts is that he's a little bit caught in the between, people telling him different things, right? For example, this suspension of deportations of farm workers was announced in a Truth Social post, but within 24 hours, DHS said, no, the instruction is you should keep deporting farm workers. And so you see kind of a lot of internal contradictions that haven't been resolved. So we'll see how this plays out.
Let's bring in a caller now. This is Barb from Kennett Square on the line. Barb, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
My comment is that the president and his administration are carrying out these deportations in a way that none of us expected. They have unmarked cars, masked people that have no identification, picking up brown-skinned people off the street. A lot of the people that they've deported have not committed crimes. And I just read about a mother who had given birth to a baby in a hospital. They carted her out and deported her and left the baby behind. So we none of us signed up for the secret police and this mass hysteria of, we got to get rid of everybody that doesn't look white. It's insane.
And that's Barb from Kennett Square talking about, just the American people's perception of these tactics. I want to read this comment from Mark, who says, I have to imagine that the tactics of the administration are driving some of this shifting. It is so inhumane and cruel to just everyday people that it is shocking to American citizens, most of whom have some type of immigrant story in their family history. The military style approach never works long term in America. Terry, when you think about what Americans are seeing on social media, when you think about what some of the media, stories have been, and the fact that the administration isn't really hiding it, I mean, how do you deal with this backlash? I mean, because Avi asked this question, do you think the Trump administration sort of anticipated that Americans would recoil in this way?
I think that they're taking a longer view of this. I think that also, public opinion on these things shifts very quickly, as we just saw, right? And I think that right now the audience that they're speaking to is primarily governments in South America, the government of Mexico, folks who are here doing bad things that shouldn't be here. One of the things that I struggle with is where were the exposés and the concern as people were being trafficked across the border and there was no enforcement whatsoever, very little in the way of checkpoints for the last 4 years. I mean, the child trafficking, the sex trafficking, the drug trafficking, a lot of people who are put in very, very dangerous situations coming from all parts of South America.
But that is, the people doing that are trying to hide it. This is in people's face.
They weren't trying to hide it in South America. The media just wasn't paying attention. Mm-hmm. It was happening in broad daylight in Mexico City, and nobody was paying attention because,
well, understandably, people in America care more about what's happening in a park in Los Angeles than something they don't have eyes on in Mexico City, Terry.
But these are the folks that are being brought that were coming into the country, and so it's not like we don't care about crime in Mexico City. That's not the issue. The issue is that millions and millions of people were flooding across the border under very, very dangerous circumstances. And and it was really Trump and his campaign that made it the primary issue in 2024. It wasn't something that, the media was trying to move the Overton window in order to fix a broken system.
But in a way, is Trump sort of like a victim of his own success? I mean, he handled the border. The number of crossings have gone down significantly. That is a win for his administration.
It's absolutely a win. And I think that's a very fair characterization. He's been effective on the border. People are less worried about it and want to get focused on other things. That's what this poll says. At this point, this poll is, to me, is a moment in time, and it's too soon to really evaluate the efficacy of these policies, as emotional and as difficult as some of them ultimately are, practically speaking.
And by the way, I want to encourage you, our listeners, to participate in the conversation, join in. The big question is, what do you think Americans really want to see when it comes to immigration? You can call 888-477-9499. You can email studio2@whyy.org. And if you're watching on YouTube, keep those comments coming in the live chat. Minnie from Westchester is on the line. Minnie, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
My comment is that every voter or commentator who says this is not what they voted for or thought would happen is lying to themselves and everyone else, because this was said at every rally. In the RNC convention had pre-printed placards of mass deportation now. Trump promised to deport 15 million immigrants. So we don't have that many criminals on the streets. Where would those people come from? So that's why we have innocents being deported or incarcerated now in these camps, and that's all I have to say about that.
Thanks for the call, Minnie.
Yeah.
Zeke, your reflections on that call, but also what Terry said. I mean, I think there is possibly an explanation here that people's shifting views are in response to the fact that they do feel like the border situation is better than it was. Therefore, it is now time to throttle back on enforcement, whatever that looks like to them.
I think there's certainly some of that. Definitely the previous administration did not have a good handle on the border. I will object a little bit, though, to this statement that there were millions and millions of trafficked and criminal people, right? We have data on this, very, very good data. In fact, one of the things where the research is the most clear is that a very tiny fraction of immigrants and undocumented immigrants are criminals or being trafficked or bring drugs. That's a very tiny perception. So that is not a problem that is as big as often was portrayed in the campaign. So that's not the issue. The problem is that now when you have a daily quota of 3,000 arrests, right, and when the premise is that a very large percentage of undocumented immigrants are criminals and you set that quota, you're just not going to find them because they don't exist, right? You're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So the fact that there is some order at the border is probably a good thing. It is a good thing for the country. I think the question now is not how much interior enforcement we need, but how do we change the system legally, right? So one of the questions I have is, what are the concrete proposals on the table to actually update our system so that there's order? If there's one thing that we're learning is Americans don't like disorder. They didn't like the disorder at the border a few years ago, and they don't like the disorder in the way people are being, kicked out either, right? And so Americans just don't like disorder.
And I want to read this comment from Luann, who actually agrees with you a bit, Zeke. Luann from Glenside says she's a moderate Democrat. She says the reason why everyone wants to come to America is that we are a stable country. We follow the rule of law, she says. People immigrating illegally undermine our rule of law system. We need to send everyone who is here illegally back to their respective countries. Then they can apply to get here legally. That's what Luann from Glenside has to say.
And Terry, Zeke kind of set you up there because to get back to something you talked about earlier, which is what is the opportunity now for Trump moving forward? Because there you would think there is a window now, given just, first of all, his control over the Republican Party, how in lockstep legislators are with anything he says, to put forth some type of system moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I just want to clarify, I am not in no way suggesting that the majority or millions of undocumented folks are criminals. That is a small portion. Every life that is lost because of a criminal who is here that could have been prevented is a problem, and Americans take exception to that. I would quibble with this idea that trafficking is not a substantially larger problem than you're letting on, but we can have that conversation maybe in a few moments. In terms of the political opportunity, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think if I remember correctly, Trump's direct quote about the Dreamers was, "I want to help them," recently. And there's obviously, as we talked about, data in this Gallup poll that shows even Republicans support doing something for Dreamers by substantial numbers. So getting something done there, I think the courts stepping in and sort of reining in the more unseemly aspects of enforcement, I think, is also going to put up some political guardrails for Congress to figure out how to work with the administration to get something done. And Trump ultimately is a deal maker, and he also likes to be the guy who is the only president who could do this.
I get that, but I also wonder if he can throttle back on this specific issue, given how central it was to his initial rise and appeal from the moment he came down the escalator.
He absolutely can.
You think so?
Absolutely.
Stephen Miller right there by his side, you think so?
I absolutely do. I think Mike Johnson is the ace up the sleeves there. Mike Johnson has been able to show that he is a master at being able to craft legislative compromise and get things done with very slim majorities.
And so you talked about the unsavory parts of this. What parts would be the peel back parts?
I think that some of the more, you guys, I think Zeke used the word militaristic sort of enforcement. I think leaning on local law enforcement. But this also requires local governments to work with the federal government, particularly in big cities where a lot of these things go on. This kind of dysfunction where local authorities will not cooperate with federal authorities in order to just enforce basic laws is what's creating the conditions by which federal authorities have to operate almost on their own, and creates the opportunity for this kind of approach to be the dominant one. But I think local authorities being willing to work with the federal government could help alleviate some of the more dramatic displays we've seen so far.
Maybe we can get one more caller in before we go to a break. We have Dan from Camden on the line. Dan, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Yeah, just a comment. You've correctly pointed out that the average American is sort of, this deportation thing looks kind of, I didn't vote for that, but I don't think the average American was informed by the mainstream media and public radio included of just how embedded the problem was. There was probably the perception for the average American was like, oh, it's just some people picking strawberries and the gangs down near the border and the cartels, and not realizing that so many industries are taking advantage of essentially cheap labor that can be exploited. And so here, Boston, New York, et cetera, factories, and so now it's like, there are criminals there. There are whole communities, or the landscapers don't show up. I mean, it's really eye-opening on so many levels. So I think, going forward, there will probably be some deal making. That's how, Trump, for all his conservative, he is a deal maker and a businessman. He's not a doctrinaire conservative. So hopefully, I think, again, as long as just me speaking personally, as long as that all these multi-millions of illegals can't vote, if they want to stay and work, fine by us, but don't give them the vote, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's Dan from Camden. Zeke, your thoughts in response to Dan, who says, Dan at least had no idea how dependent so many economies or so many industries were on immigrant
But he might have been
labor.
saying other Americans. I'm not
may
sure
not
if he
have
was
been.
saying he was. Yeah.
A lot of people may not have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if you start with the premise, or let me back up. We want to reform the immigration system. I think everybody agrees on that the system is broken. But how you reform it depends on the premise you start with. When you realize that immigrants are essential to the 5 key things that every local and national economy needs, that is, they fill essential jobs because they have talent, they bring investment, innovation, they pay taxes, and crucially, they're consumers, right? When you think about 15 million people that do those 5 things, the premise on how you solve the issue is very different than if they're not bringing those 5 things, okay? And so we need an immigration system that harnesses that, yes, in an orderly way, but we need those things, right? Part of what the economic evidence is very clear on is that in addition to the humanitarian issues, these mass deportations are really hurting local economies, and that's part of why I think you're hearing this switch in public opinion as well.
Yeah, when the reality sort of hits.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear because we've talked about this Gallup poll a lot, and where Trump's numbers on immigration are especially poor. He has a net approval on just his general job on immigration in this Gallup poll of -27. But Fox poll, -7, Ipsos poll, -8, Marist poll, -9, Quinnipiac poll, -16. It's not just that one poll, although it's an outlier in probably how big the numbers are. So going back to something we talked about earlier, I do think you both kind of downplayed how big the actual shift was. There does seem to be something, though, happening in do I trust this guy on this issue? When the election happened, it seemed like a lot of people said yes. He was far better. His numbers were far better than Harris's when you ask voters, who do you trust on immigration? Those net approval numbers tell me something else. They tell me something has changed on whether they trust him to do something about it. Terry, as we approach a break, do you think Americans are no longer trust Trump on this issue? Can he get that back?
The images that you've seen on social media and on television remind me a lot of sort of the Bush administration with Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. And all. These images are very powerful in moving public opinion, and when people are startled. And the question is it sustainable?
Yeah. That's a great point. We'll talk more about that on the other side of this break. 888-477-9499 is our number. Studio 2 at WHYY.org is our email. We want to know what you think Americans really want when it comes to immigration. Give us a call. This is Studio 2 on WHYY.
Welcome back to Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt. We are talking this hour about American views on immigration and if the Trump administration's hardline policies have actually backfired, leading to more pro-immigration sentiment. Our question for you is this: what do you think Americans actually want on immigration? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can email studio2 at WHYY.org, or if you're on YouTube, drop a comment right there in the chat.
And let me reintroduce our guest. We have Zeke Hernandez, a professor at the Wharton School and author of The Truth About Immigration. We also have Terry Tracy, a Republican commentator and CEO of Broad and Liberty. I want to read a couple comments. Don't Touch My Hair said on YouTube, a lot of people just want immigrants for their cheap labor. That's it. Once people found that farm workers or hotel workers were going away, now there's an issue. Dylan says, I want our immigration system to be properly funded. Visa holders should be able to schedule appointments to renew their visas before they expire. And I want to sort of talk about the Big Beautiful Bill, which makes billions of dollars of investment towards ICE and law enforcement, federal law enforcement. And I want to just read a couple of data points from the Gallup poll. Support for increasing the number of Border Patrol agents has declined 17 points to about 59%. That's from 76% a year ago. And backing for expanding the U.S.-Mexico border wall has dropped 8 points to 45%. And we talk about finding solutions. Is this a pivot point for the Trump administration to sort of redirect some of this and maybe even find a way to sort of fix the backlog, deal with some of the other issues that have been clogging the immigration system, and really just sort of find a solution and not necessarily put all that money on enforcement, Terry?
Well, I sort of feel ridiculous even saying the words "one big beautiful bill" because it's so comical to me. But
yeah.
You know,
that's the actual name. That is the actual name.
And I'll admit it actually took me a minute. I thought it was sort of just like colloquial or whatever. And then when I saw it was the name of the bill, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I can't spend the next year of my life talking about the one big beautiful bill.
Yet,
here we are. Also interesting about that bill is how immigrant communities, immigrant sort of related operations are used to fund the bill as well.
Mm-hmm.
There were, taking folks off of various welfare and social safety net programs, charging additional fees. I think there's a proposal in the bill that charges folks coming to the country like $5,000 in order to get a visa. So, there was a lot in this bill that was just not on the enforcement side, but on the economic side, basically making it harder to come to the country and more expensive to stay in the country and litigate whatever your situation is. So it certainly sent a message to the American electorate that this administration was going to be very, very tough on those communities. And but whether that is just being used as leverage, because my understanding is the Republican majorities are looking at subsequent reconciliation bills if they can't get things passed otherwise in later this year and early next, and a standalone immigration bill is on the table. And I wonder how much of this is just setting up the bargaining chips for what ultimately is going to come down the pike legislatively.
Real quick, though, Terry, to follow up, because you mentioned before the break that these images you think are having a shock effect on public opinion, and that if the images go away, that we'll see the numbers change. The question really is, if these images continue to percolate and if the enforcement continues to ramp up as the allocations in this bill suggest they might, what will happen to Republicans in the midterm?
It was very easy. The Biden administration made it very easy for Trump and those campaigning with him to use the story of Laken Riley and the images associated with crimes that were being committed by people here illegally to shape the electorate's opinion about this particular issue. Now that it's not a choice between Biden and or Harris and Trump on this particular issue, it's Trump. And what kind of job is he doing on this particular issue? And so, the Iraq War was a very, very popular war when it started. And those images from Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay and, torturing efficacy of the policy notwithstanding, Bush left office as one of the most unpopular presidents in modern American history. And so what that shows you is the administration then did a terrible job of messaging their policy and explaining the efficacy of the policy to get the support from the American people. Trump can't just ride the wave or ride the golden escalator on immigration rhetoric from pre-2020, November of 24.
You're saying it
and
will come back. Politically, it will come back.
It can come back, but it really is up to what the administration and its political allies do.
Yeah. I want to bring in a caller. We have Dan from Ambler on the line. Dan, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi, guys. I just wanted to, bring up the point that, one of your guests mentioned about immigration reform, how, they're talking about immigration bills and so forth. And half of the reason Donald Trump was elected is because, we have all the immigration laws on the books you can care for, We legally let in 1.2 million immigrants a year. There's nothing wrong with our immigration system. It is, the policy that any given administration seems to enact. The Biden administration effectively, rolled out the welcome mat and, paved the way for Donald Trump to use that as political fodder to get himself elected. So, much of this is about the policy, seemingly, not the actual laws. They're really only worth, whatever somebody chooses to enforce.
Yeah.
Well, let me get Zeke's response to that, though, because there are an estimated, depending on what number you use, like about 10, 13 million people undocumented living in this country. And if the idea is we just need to enforce the laws on the books, Zeke, then all of those people are, in a pretty short period of time, removed from the country. What happens to the country? Because I wonder, people are shocked by a few videos on social media. The shock of that could be far greater, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't deport 13.7 million people without establishing a police state, right? Which is kind of what we're funding right now. But I think the premise that the law makes sense and we just have to enforce it is a demonstrably false premise, right? Once you start to understand how the law works. Now, we don't have the time to go through it all, but just a few things. Most people don't know that the last time we updated the number and types of visas we give was 1990. The law is older than the internet, right? When I tell my students that, they can't believe it, right? And then you say, okay, well, why then do we have 13.7 million people who live here without authorization? Give you some examples. Farmers. If you need a year-round farm worker in this country, guess how many visas we have for that? 0. They do not exist. We don't have visas for plumbers, for carpenters year-round, right? We have a housing crisis. We have a labor crisis because we don't have enough people being born. So
enforcement without change in law or reform is going to result in
either huge economic suffering for everyday people or in more irregular immigration, because the biggest predictor actually of irregular border crossings is unfilled job positions in the United States, right? And so when the system doesn't match the economic and social reality we have, we get a black market for people and talent, which is our unauthorized immigration system. We all agree that's not the right way to do it, but enforcement without reform doesn't get us there.
Yeah, and so Zeke, I wonder, because under this new bill, 100,000 beds for detention, for housing people who are undocumented that have been funded. Also, they want to bring in thousands more ICE agents. If you were to write the prescription for, clearly this prescription is very enforcement heavy, what would that look like to sort of help fix this?
Well, again, it depends on the premise you start with. If all of these are criminals, of course, we have to find a way to not have them here. But if they're just honest, hardworking people, right, who, yes, broke the law several years ago. By the way, more than 3/4 of undocumented immigrants have been in this country for a decade. They have families, mortgages, many of them own businesses that employ citizens. These are people that are doing something we need, right? 60% of Republicans in the latest poll agree with giving them a path toward legalization. We're much better off giving them an orderly legal path to be regularized than kicking 14 million people out who pay taxes, consume, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I would do. ICE has become the highest funded police agency in the history of this country, $75 billion in funding. Yeah. You just don't have that many immigrant criminals to deal with. So what do you do with that funding? You end up either deporting people who aren't criminals or making mistakes in who you detain, or you have to direct those funds to something more productive.
And then the question becomes for me, Terry Tracy, if this is the public reaction to, I think there are about 55,000 migrants in ICE custody right now. The idea of deporting 1 million people a year, which is the stated goal, we're nowhere close to that. And this is the reaction. It would suggest to me that at some point, the president will either pivot on this issue and give up the stated goal, or will suffer tremendous electoral consequences. Is that the basic choice here?
That's why you have to strike a deal. Ultimately, that's what you have to do. Because I do think that the numbers, and is 13 million, that the number is a 20. No one really knows how many folks are here, but the reality is we're never going to round everybody up and get them. It's a practical it's just practically speaking not a reality. And so that puts you in a position where politically, because you're not going to be able to sustain the support of the electorate, you're going to take a bath in the midterms. If this trend were to continue and public opinion shifts, you have to make a deal. But you cannot just legalize tens of millions of people without having reform to the system done at the same time. Because if you so that you don't get yourself in this situation
maybe the
again.
ultimate test,
because we did this in the 80s
of Trump's sort of
with the amnesty
if
Reagan.
Trump has had a remarkable capacity to unite Republicans behind whatever he says.
Yep.
This, to me, Terry, would be the ultimate test of that, given how central he has made this issue to Republican messaging, considering how many of those Republicans are on record over the last 10 years saying, yes, deport millions of people and things along those lines. I mean, do you think Trump could, even if he wants to do it, could he really pass that test? Would Republicans still in lockstep stick with him on that?
There are specific examples that I think he could leverage to his benefit in order to get that kind of buy-in. Let me give you one. I think it's Nicaragua. I might be wrong. Zeke, if you know, please correct me. But there are many migrants here on temporary protected status from Nicaragua because of a hurricane that happened in 1998. There's nothing temporary about folks who are still here on TPS since 1998. Those people have been here for a long time. By and large, most of them are productive members of society. And offering folks like that, I think Trump can go to Republicans and say, we screwed up, right? The government, administrations from both parties, Congresses who have been led by both parties for decades have failed both the American people and those who are not here, who came here illegally. And we have an opportunity to fix that. So I'm asking you to make a compromise, get some things done, and support me here where we're going to give a little, but we're going to get order, we're going to get security, and we're going to get economic growth as a result of those compromises.
But I think about the Haitians. I had TPS, and their TPS has recently been revoked, and I think in September they'll lose their protected status. I mean, and he ran on some of the things talking, derogatorily about the Haitian community. How do you sort of roll that back and not let it be some kind of a whiplash situation from the Trump administration?
I mean, it's Trump. You get a whiplash every day. I mean, you
you
never from social media post to social media post. I mean,
and in some ways you could argue that is a strength of his. Like we've seen this now with Russia and Ukraine.
I was just going to say,
it's sort of like it's mind-boggling. It doesn't make any sense coherently, but Republicans do seem to march behind him. And let me ask you then, Zeke Hernandez, do you think Trump is, in a weird way, a sort of a photo-negative way, actually well-positioned to do something on this issue where other Republican and even Democratic presidents simply did not have the political capital to strike this supposed grand deal, this grand bargain?
He has the power right now. Yeah. Whether he will do it, we don't know. Again, because of these two factions, right? I think the problem is he's a little bit caught in the middle, right, between people for whom kicking immigrants out is the goal, right, and people who want order and want to grow an economy.
Many of those people within his administration.
Yeah, and so I think you're kind of stuck between the two. He has not proven to be very willing to work across the aisle. This will require working across the aisle, but I think he does have the power and the opportunity. The other reason, right, because we've talked a lot about Trump and Republicans, but I think this is telling us a lot about how inept Democrats have been on this issue.
We're not even talking about them. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, right, Kamala Harris's message on immigration was, I'm going to pass this bill that Trump vetoed, and I'm going to try to out-Trump Trump on the border, which of course is not credible because you're not going to outdo Trump on being tough on the border. But Democrats for a long time haven't had a positively articulated message about what they believe about immigration, right? Other than maybe let's be nice to these needy people.
It's very reactionary,
right?
Yeah,
This is what I call sort of in my book the villain versus victim dichotomy, right? That Trump ran on immigrants as villains. Democrats for a long time have had more of a sort of compassionate immigrants or victims, but there is a third possibility here that immigrants are good for us and we can have an orderly way to make them good for us. That's the opportunity Trump has. I'm a bit skeptical that he'll get there, but I want him to get there, right? Yeah. I want him to get there more than anyone.
People want a solution to this issue.
It's not just Biden and Harris. I think the other thing that the American people saw is a lot of goofy things happening at the state and local level. New York giving illegal folks the ability to vote in municipal elections. Gavin Newsom's policies around sort of healthcare subsidies for folks who are here. I think the sort of America First coalition is not anti-immigrant. They want to make sure American citizens are taken care of first, and then we get to the next tranche of folks.
And I just want to point out a lot of people we couldn't get to, but Charlotte from Chalfont wanted to talk about how U.S. foreign policy had destabilized a lot of the places where people are coming from. So I wanted to shout that out. Renardo, calling from Florida, is for common sense immigration, wants people to come forward and get a background check, and those who don't come forward would be removed. Hadn't heard that one before. That's Renardo's prescription.
And we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to Zeke Hernandez, professor at the Wharton School and author of The Truth About Immigration.
Thank you.
And to you, Terry Tracy, Republican commentator and CEO of Broad and Liberty. We appreciate your insight today on the show.
Thank you,
guys. Thanks, Zeke.
Yes, and thank you to our producers, Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Thanks to Mike Schiffler, our visual producer, and to Al Banks and Tina Calicay, who engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory. From Studio 2 here at WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent. We will talk to you tomorrow. And tomorrow in Studio 2, Elon Musk. Isn't that a great way to start a sentence?
It is.
Elon Musk says he's starting a new political party, the America Party, and so far he seems pretty serious about it. Then yesterday, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announced he's going to run in a third-party bid for the city's mayoral.
Is now the time for more than 2 lanes in critical elections? We'll look at the many attempts to make a third party viable and the criticism that they spoil races. That is happening tomorrow on Studio 2. But coming up next here on WHYY, it's Here and Now. We'll see you tomorrow on the radio.